Hey everyone, hi gang. Welcome. Tuesday, April 15th, 2025. It's tax day. It's also Miami Dolphins annual pre-draft press conference day with general manager Chris Greer, which this year wasn't so much about the draft, but more so about what's going on around the team, all sorts of topics, starting with the Jaylen Ramsey situation, status of Tyreek Hill, Patrick Paul in the left tackle position, starting safeties, feeling pressure, whether there was a mandate from owner Stephen Ross to not spend as much this offseason. Whole bunch of topics addressed by Chris Greer on this day. And let's dive right into it. It started with Jaylen Ramsey. In fact, Greer did not even wait for the first question, which probably was going to be about Jaylen Ramsey, basically saying he was going to make a statement to start things off in response to the report out of the NFL Network on Tuesday morning about the Dolphins and Jaylen Ramsey, the seven-time Pro Bowl cornerback, agreeing to explore trade options. The comments that stood out from Chris Greer pertaining to that situation, where this came about after a lot of discussions between the Dolphins and Ramsey's representation. And unless I'm going crazy right now, and I apologize going off the top of my head, but he's got the same agent as Javon Holland, as Christian Wilkins, that's David Mulgeta, who is one of the most powerful agents in the NFL. There was no official trade request made by Ramsey or his representation. Again, this is Chris Greer. Does not know exactly when a trade would materialize, whether it would be before, during, or after the draft. Has had conversations with other teams already pertaining to a potential Jaylen Ramsey trade. And then the question even was brought up about the possibility of maybe Jaylen Ramsey even being on the roster in 2025. As I just wrote in an analysis piece on Miami Dolphins on SI.com, once you reach the point where the story's out there that the player has asked, let me take that back, that the player and the team have agreed to explore trade options, I think you pretty much reach the point of no return. So I would say those thinking, well, maybe it'll blow over and cooler heads would prevail. And Ramsey will be back on the roster in 2025. Nothing to see here, folks. Yeah, probably not happening. The percentage of that scenario playing out has to be very, very low. No two ways about it. Greer, again, talking about the Jaylen Ramsey situation, said it was not contract related. And one wouldn't think it would be, considering the Dolphins redid his contract after they acquired him from the Rams for a third-round pick and tight end Hunter Long. This is in 2023. And they redid his contract last summer when they did not need to, as was the case with the Tyreek Hill contract, as was the case with the Mike McDaniel contract, because they had multiple years left on those deals. We can debate the Tua Tagovailoa contract extension as opposed to making him play on the fifth-year option. That's not quite in the same realm in terms of egregiousness as far as I'm concerned. Again, because Dolphins did not need to redo Ramsey's contract for a second time in 2 years. They did not need to redo Tyreek Hill's contract again after they had redone it once they acquired him from the Chiefs in that trade. And what basically those contracts did is basically eliminate a lot of the flexibility the Dolphins might have to make some moves. Now they're going to take a cap hit that could be painful when they move on from Jaylen Ramsey. Tyreek Hill, we'll discuss him a little bit later. Again, he would be a lot easier to move on from right now had it not been for the fact that Dolphins guaranteed a lot of money when he had no guaranteed money left on his contract. So, not supposed to be contract driven, those discussions. Chris Greer basically used the obligatory, the very familiar, the lovely best interests of Ramsey and the Dolphins. What exactly that means, I'm not quite sure what that means from a Dolphin standpoint. What's in their best interest not to have their most talented defensive player on the roster? I'm not sure. So now we get into, it's purely speculation. Is it personality clashes? Is there another issue at play, off the field stuff? Doesn't like the scheme? Don't know. Chris Greer didn't want to divulge. I think at one point he threw out the idea we can ask Jaylen Ramsey. Don't know if we'll ever get Jaylen Ramsey in a media setting as a member of the Dolphins from now on. Moving forward, gonna guess not going to be in the offseason training program, even if the Dolphins have not consummated a trade by that time. The next issue is, what can the Dolphins get in the trade for Jaylen Ramsey? Well, Dolphins got him for a third-round pick and Hunter Long, which basically tells you keep the expectations and the hopes pretty low. They're not getting a first-round pick. What may very well happen, and what happens a lot in deals these days, is it very well could be Ramsey and a draft pick for a higher draft pick. If it's Ramsey purely for a draft pick, can you get a third? Again, Dolphins paid a third and Hunter Long, who was a tight end 2 years into his NFL career, who had done practically nothing for Miami. So again, stretching maybe a 2, probably maybe a low 2. But that's, again, that might be best case scenario. The acquiring team is going to be on the hook for $21.1 million in 2025. It's all guaranteed, and the Dolphins are going to be on the hook regardless for $4 million because of a roster bonus that they already paid him. In terms of the cap hit, it's not egregious. Always, gang, the cap hit's always less. And I don't have the exact figure in front of me, but the cap hit's always less if you're dealing with a trade as opposed to cutting a player, because the acquiring team takes up a lot of the financial burden. What it doesn't get is the cap ramifications of the signing bonus prorated. So, for example, the Dolphins have already paid or the entire signing bonus, and it's prorated to, I think it's $6.7 million a year or something along those lines. That's always going to be on the Dolphins' books, no matter whether he's traded. Could it be Ramsey for another player? Potentially. Who could it be? I think somebody out there threw out the idea of Jair Alexander from the Green Bay Packers and a cornerback for cornerback swap, which on the surface, yeah, sounds good. Jair Alexander is a very good player, except he's missed 20 games the past 2 years. He's missed 33 games the past 4 years. Do the Dolphins really want to go that route? And he's also not cheap. So, no, I don't expect that. Certain betting sites have some teams already lined up as the betting favorites to acquire services. The Raiders stand at the top, and I am told the Raiders are hot and heavy with interest that, yes, they will be interested in that idea. They have a lot of cap space. Remember what we said earlier in the offseason. I think we threw that out there. It certainly was written on Miami Dolphins on SI.com. That one player they were looking to move or would be willing to move was tight end Michael Mayer, who not so long ago was a third-round pick out of Notre Dame. Dolphins do have enough tight ends on the roster as it stands right now with Jonnu Smith, Julian Hill, newcomer Pharaoh Brown. But Michael Mayer is probably better than any of them except for Jonnu Smith. And potentially could develop in somebody who is better as an all-around tight end. This guy's a good player. So could that be a possibility? That's certainly one to throw out there that could be intriguing, worth considering. But the bottom line is, again, with Jaylen Ramsey, don't know exactly what's led to this. Not contract related. And even though he has, per Chris Greer, he has not asked for a trade, if you reach the point where the two sides have agreed to explore trade possibilities, if it's not asking for a trade, it's basically saying, yeah, I think it might be a good idea to move me. So, again, we might get caught up into semantics here. But it sounds like, again, the union between the Dolphins and Jaylen Ramsey is going to be over after only 2 years. Jaylen Ramsey is a great defensive player, great defensive back. He may not be quite as elite as he once was as a pure cover corner. Garrett Wilson against the Jets gave him a lot of trouble last year, but he's an elite defensive back, again, because of the many things he can do. Not going to surprise me one bit if he winds up at safety at some point in his career before too long, but likely it's not going to be with the Miami Dolphins. And while this is kind of jarring a little bit, This is a guy who's already been traded twice, 5th overall pick in the 2016 draft, 7 Pro Bowl selections in now 9 NFL seasons. So you're looking with an uber talented player who's moved on from team to team. That at some point stops becoming an accident. So this is what we're looking here. As far as Tyreek Hill is concerned, Chris Greer repeated what has been said or what had been reported that no, he's not looking to trade Tyreek Hill, even in light of the incident that happened last week, which Chris Greer was not going to comment on, and that's perfectly fine. Again, Dolphins released a statement at the time of the incident. There's what more is Chris Greer going to say? Said no team has called the Dolphins or called him to discuss a potential Tyreek Hill trade. Did say, however, the team's going to call me and offer me 2 first-round picks. Sure. This is the ever popular, if you ever hear a report or see a report of a team is listening to offers for a particular player, understand that it's not the same thing as a team shopping a player. Because guess what? Any player has a price, or practically any player has a price. Team could be calling the Eagles right now, I'll give you 3 1s for Saquon Barkley. Well, guess what? I'm going to listen to that. Doesn't mean the Eagles are shopping him. There's no such thing as, there's a big difference between shopping again and listening to offers. Still says from here, it's less than 50-50 Tyreek Hill is going to get traded because, again, the Dolphins are better with him than they are without him. He's not really cuttable based on his contract. And again, if they get blown away by an offer, but what team is going to make that kind of an offer for a 31-year-old wide receiver who's coming off a down year, who, let's just say, produces, I think I wrote on the website, indigestion or, headaches with negative headlines more often than not, you're not going to get the return to really justify a trade. So it doesn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense. This is a question that fans have been asking about, and wanted the reporters to really pound on Chris Greer, to really be tough, justify your existence basically to the fan base and all that. Well, it was asked, and I don't recall the exact wording, but in different ways, a couple of different times. And basically Chris Greer, he gets it. He knows he's not necessarily hugely popular with the fan base, understands the pressure. He says he knows that a lot of fans want him fired yesterday. He gets it. And then told a story about a fan sending him a letter, basically telling him he was supporting him, hoping for the best. And then accompanying the letter was a T-shirt that said, "Don't F this up." So this is the role of a GM. They understand it comes with the territory. As far and again, for fans who wanted the really, really hard, I don't know exactly what you want in terms of question. All the questions that needed to be asked were asked. There were some, obviously, that you're going to get the typical GM answer. Some that you're not going to get the full information because it doesn't be. For example, in terms of Jaylen Ramsey and Tyreek Hill, if the Dolphins indeed are entertaining the idea of trading either one or both of those, it behooves them, Chris Greer in particular at this point, not to kill the value of the player or diminish the value of the player by making negative comments. So while he remains on the roster, Jaylen Ramsey's a hell of a player. He's a Hall of Famer, great teammate, great leader, and all that. Certainly don't want to give away any negative thoughts for a team that might be interested in acquiring his services. And the same goes for Tyreek Hill. On the topic, there were 2 interesting questions in terms of finances because the Dolphins, for lack of a better term, shopped on the cheap this offseason. They signed a lot of players, but James Daniels, the guard coming over from the Pittsburgh Steelers, was the only guy who really got, a significant contract. So the 2-part question was, why was Tua's contract now restructured to easily clear up $19 million of cap space, which also, however, would have pushed some cap constraints down the road as far as cap commitments down the road as far as tour is concerned. And the next question, whether there was a mandate from Stephen Ross to not spend quite as much, to pull back a little bit financially. And Greer basically said they had more than enough money to do what they wanted to do without having to touch Tua's contract. And for those not familiar, we've addressed this before. The way this contract was structured per the salary analytics websites, Tua counts on the books for $39 million of cap space this year. It jacks up to over $50 million next year when he has $54 million guaranteed after being on the roster on the third day of the 2025 league year. For those wondering about a trade as well, part of that cap number in 2025 includes a $40 million guaranteed base salary. So for those fans, and there are some out there who want Tua traded, understand that any team that makes that trade is on the hook for $40 million guaranteed in 2026 for a quarterback with a rather significant injury history. So not easy. And Tua's not going anywhere. Anyway, I asked the question because it was brought up in the national media. I believe it was Adam Schefter who threw out at one point, if Shedeur Sanders is there at number 13 or slides down in the draft, couple of teams to look out for as possibilities throughout three teams. I don't remember the other two. Might have been Pittsburgh, might have been one of them. And then he mentioned the Dolphins. So I asked, doing due diligence, asked Chris Greer if he was ready to rule out, regardless of potential scenario, the idea of taking a quarterback in round one. And he basically said, we have our starter. Wouldn't rule anything out, but we're not looking for a quarterback. So that was addressed. Going back to Ross and the idea of pulling back on, the financial spending and all that, Chris Greer said that was never even talked about, that it was operating under the same circumstances as always. And this was just a course that it felt like taking. Said they had a plan in place. Chris Greer also made a point to mention post-June 1 possibilities. This is when a lot of veterans wind up getting cut. This is a secondary or, tertiary free agency wave where other players could be available. As it stands right now, there are a couple of players at certain positions, cornerback being one of them, where you can get some good players. Rasul Douglas, Stephon Gilmore are still out there, cornerback. So, but he says he's felt very comfortable with where they stand in terms of their needs, which, as most everybody has listed, would include defensive tackle, cornerback, safety, and guard. However, when it comes to safety, the question was asked directly, are you comfortable that your two starting safeties are currently on the roster? And Chris Greer, without hesitation, said yes. We will remind you the four safeties on the roster currently are Patrick McMorris, 2024 sixth-round pick. Elijah Campbell re-signed recently as a UFA, mostly a special teams player during his NFL career. Free agent acquisition, Ashton Davis, mostly a special teams player during his time with the Jets. And Ifeatu Melifonwu, free agent acquisition from the Detroit Lions, who doesn't have a ton of starts either because he battled injury and also saw time at cornerback and in the slot during his time with the Lions. So to say the Dolphins have a proven commodity or option on the roster, no. Chris Greer still has confidence. So if you were to take those comments at face value, that would mean Malachi Starks or Nick Emenwari from South Carolina probably out the window as a possibility as the number one pick. If the Dolphins stay put at 13, this is another question I asked of Chris Greer. Considering that you have more needs heading into this draft than you normally do, would you be more willing or more likely to trade down to accumulate more picks? And after saying yes, he also said, but if there's a player we really like, we're not opposed to moving up either, which would mean squandering draft picks. I don't think the Dolphins are in a position to be squandering draft picks personally. Greer also said, this is something I haven't heard him say before, the Dolphins are going to be looking for guys to make an immediate impact. Before it was always, we're looking for good football players. That never really came up before. This time specifically, and Dude, Dolphins are going to have a lot of roles to fill without question. And one of those recent high draft picks who has not made an immediate impact, and that's being kind, that's Cam Smith. And Chris Greer put him on alert, expects him to come through in 2025. It says we need that. He needs to step it up. And without question, because the Dolphins, if they do move on from Jaylen Ramsey, now don't have a need for one starting cornerback on the outside. They have a need for two. And even though Chris Greer mentioned Cater Coe having the ability to play outside in the slot, called him a Swiss Army knife, true, but he is much, much better in the slot than he is outside. I would say even he is an above average to good slot cornerback. He is an average to below average outside cornerback. And I don't know, but I'd prefer having above average players at every position. So with Kendall Fuller already gone, Jaylen Ramsey on his way out, Dolphins need two starting cornerbacks because right now we're looking at Cam Smith, Ethan Bonner, Storm Duck, Isaiah Johnson, Jason Maitre, newcomer Roy Cooper Jr., free agent acquisition, Artie Burns Jr. That's not solid enough. Greer was asked whether it was injuries that led to Kendall Fuller, the veteran, being released. Greer did not want to touch that one. Also asked about Calais Campbell and whether the Dolphins made an effort to bring him back, whether ultimately it was financial considerations that led to him leaving for Arizona, and didn't get the full answer I was looking for. Can't say I'm overly shocked. But basically, yes, an offer was made. Calais chose to go back to original team in Arizona. Great player. We wish him the best. Guess I could have formulated the question more point blank. Were you willing to pay Campbell as much as he got from the Cardinals? Shame on me for not phrasing it that way. I went a different route and didn't get the answer. But truth be told, I don't imagine that that would have been necessarily something that Chris Greer would have wanted to share. So I kind of about sums it up. I'm probably leaving out some things, but we will revisit everything that was discussed in one way, shape, or form in a later episode. That's probably going to wrap it up for now. On a programming note, we're going to be back on Wednesday. This might be a little bit draft intensive before we come back to Greer later on in the week as the plan. Please like, subscribe, share all that good stuff. And programming note, if you want to check me out, I will be joining my Dolphins collective partners, T Defense Talk, Dudley Durong, and Omar Kelly, live on YouTube on Tuesday night at 8:30 p.m. Check us out there. Check back here tomorrow. Probably I'm thinking 4:30-ish for the next episode of the All Dolphins podcast. That's going to wrap it up for this particular one. And again, the big news on this Tuesday is Jaylen Ramsey is basically heading out the door after 2 seasons with the Dolphins. So thanks, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday.